It was one of those nights that made people forget the world outside. The city lights were reflected on the glass walls of the Grand Royal Hotel, where a charity gala was taking place. Expensive perfumes floated in the air, crystal glasses sparkled under chandeliers, and laughter bounced off the marble floors. Waiters and waitresses moved quietly between the tables, serving champagne and trays of appetizers. Among them was a young woman with calm eyes and a tired smile. Her name was Lila. She had been working since morning, and her feet ached from walking in tight shoes, but she never let it show. She needed this job. The guests were the kind of people who didn't notice someone like her. They talked loudly about their business deals, travels, and cars. Their jewelry shone brighter than the kindness in their eyes. Lila had learned to move through them like a shadow, invisible and silent. But deep inside her, she carried something that no one in that room could see, a past full of music and memories that she had locked away long ago. The center of the room sat the man everyone came to impress, a billionaire named Mr. Kane. He owned half the city, it seemed, and he loved being reminded of it. His laugh was loud, his words sharp, and his arrogance filled the space around him like smoke. People laughed at his jokes even when they weren't funny. That night he was in a good mood, showing off to his friends about a new business deal. Money, he said, is like music. You just need to know how to play it right. His words made his guests chuckle. Then his eyes fell on the grand piano near the stage, a black, glossy Steinway that hadn't been touched all evening. Speaking of music, he said, his voice carrying across the room, does anyone here know how to play that thing? A few guests laughed. One woman said she hadn't played since high school. Another man joked, I can pay someone to play for me. The room filled with light laughter again. Mr. Kane smirked and leaned back in his chair. Shame. A piano that expensive shouldn't sit silent. Lila, who was passing by with a tray of drinks, couldn't help but glance at it. Her eyes lingered for a second too long, and Mr. Kane caught it. You there, he called out suddenly. Lila froze. The tray shook slightly in her hands as everyone turned to look. Yes, you, he said, pointing. You were staring at the piano. Do you play? Her face flushed. I used to, she said quietly, unsure if she should even answer. You used to? He raised an eyebrow, pretending to be curious but clearly amused. Then maybe you can give us a performance. The guests laughed softly, some out of discomfort, some out of cruelty. Lila blinked, stunned. Oh no, sir, I couldn't. I haven't played in years, she tried to explain, keeping her voice steady, but he wasn't listening. Come on, it'll be fun, he said, gesturing toward the piano. How often does a waitress get to perform at a billionaire's gala? The laughter grew louder. Lila felt her chest tighten. She didn't want to make a scene, but she also didn't want to humiliate herself. I'm sorry, sir, she said again, shaking her head politely. I really shouldn't. But Mr. Kane interrupted, his tone turning slightly mocking. Are you refusing me? I thought everyone here was supposed to serve the guests. His words stung. The crowd waited, sensing the tension. She felt small, cornered like a butterfly pinned under glass. She wanted to disappear, but all she could see were faces watching her, waiting for her next move. Then he added with a smirk, Tell you what, if you play something worth listening to, I'll double your pay for tonight. A few people clapped as if it were a game. Phones were raised. Someone whispered, This will be funny. Lila's heart was pounding. She wanted to say no, to walk away. But something in her, maybe pride, maybe the voice of her late mother who had taught her music, whispered back, Do it. Show them. She put her tray down carefully on a side table. Her fingers felt numb as she walked toward the piano. Every step felt heavier than the last. The room had gone quiet except for a few chuckles. When she reached the piano, she ran her hand lightly over the keys. The surface was cold, smooth, familiar. Memories flooded her mind. Late nights sitting beside her mother, learning scales, the warmth of home, the sound of laughter that once filled their small living room. She hadn't touched a piano since her mother passed away. That day she'd promised herself she wouldn't play again. The pain was too deep. Now, standing before these strangers who expected her to fail, she wondered why she ever stopped. She took a deep breath and sat down. Her hands hovered above the keys. Her fingers trembled slightly. The billionaire chuckled from his seat. Any day now, he said loudly. More laughter followed. Lila closed her eyes. The room disappeared. All she could hear was her heartbeat and the quiet hum of the air conditioner. Then she pressed a single key. A soft note filled the hall. Then another. It was uncertain at first, like a whisper in a storm. The guests exchanged looks. Some smirked, others sighed, thinking it would be over soon. But then her fingers began to move differently. A simple melody took shape, delicate but filled with emotion. It sounded like a memory being told through music. Conversations started to fade. The laughter died. The notes began to grow stronger, more confident. Her body swayed slightly as she played, lost in rhythm. She wasn't a waitress anymore, not in that moment. She was a musician, a storyteller, pouring her soul through the keys. The song built slowly, from fragile beginnings to powerful waves of sound that filled the room. Every note carried a piece of her pain, her love, her silence, her hope. The guests who had been ready to laugh were now frozen in their seats. The billionaire's smirk faded. His drink sat untouched. Something about the melody tugged at everyone's heart in a way words couldn't. Lila's eyes stayed closed as her hands danced across the piano. For the first time in years, she felt alive. She wasn't playing to impress them. She was playing because she needed to, because music was the only language she truly understood. When the final note hung in the air, she didn't open her eyes right away. The sound lingered like a breath between two heartbeats. Then silence. No one spoke. No one moved. It was as if the whole room had forgotten where they were. Lila slowly lifted her hands from the keys and stood up. Her legs felt weak, but her heart was strangely light. She didn't know what to expect. Laughter again, maybe awkward applause. But instead there was nothing. Only the quiet hum of the air and the sound of someone taking a shaky breath. Then slowly someone began to clap. Then another. Within seconds, the whole room erupted into applause. The billionaire sat still for a long time, watching her. The smugness was gone from his face. There was something else there now. Respect, maybe even regret. Lila bowed her head slightly and turned to walk away. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. As she returned to her corner, one of the waiters whispered, "I didn't know you could play like that." Lila just smiled faintly. "Neither did they," she said softly. Across the room, the billionaire watched her go, lost in thought. He had wanted a laugh, but what he got instead was a lesson, one that silenced a room full of people who thought they'd seen everything. And somewhere deep inside, Lila knew something had shifted. She had faced the thing she feared most, her own music, and for the first time she wasn't running from it. She didn't know it yet, but that single performance would change everything. The room was still humming from the magic she had just created. Even though the song was over, its echo seemed to linger in the air. People were whispering softly, trying to make sense of what they had just witnessed. Some of them still had tears in their eyes. Lila stood near the edge of the room, her hands clasped together. Her heart was still racing. She couldn't tell if it was fear, relief, or something else that made her chest feel so full. She wanted to disappear quietly back into the kitchen, but the billionaire's voice stopped her. "Wait." She froze. The word wasn't loud, but it carried enough weight to silence everyone again. Mr. Kane stood up from his table, his face unreadable. The same man who had mocked her minutes ago now looked strangely serious. He adjusted his suit, then walked slowly toward her. The crowd stepped aside as he moved, all eyes following him. When he stopped in front of her, the air felt heavy. Lila didn't know whether to look at him or keep her eyes down. "That," he said finally, "was unexpected." His tone was softer now, but there was still a trace of arrogance behind it, the kind that came from never being challenged. "Thank you, sir," she said quietly. Her voice was calm, though her hands trembled slightly. He tilted his head, studying her. "You said you hadn't played in years." "Yes, sir." He gave a small, disbelieving smile. That didn't sound like someone who forgot. Lila didn't know how to answer. She simply said, "I just remembered how it felt." There was a small murmur in the crowd, people exchanging glances, whispering about how a waitress could play like that. Someone even clapped again, and soon the room filled with another wave of applause. But not everyone was happy. Some guests, the ones who had laughed earlier, now looked uncomfortable. It wasn't fun anymore to mock someone who had just silenced the entire hall with beauty. The billionaire raised a hand, signaling the room to quiet down again. He looked at her with something between curiosity and pride, as if he had discovered a rare gem without even trying. "Tell me," he said, "where did you learn to play like that?" Lila hesitated. "My mother taught me when I was young." He nodded thoughtfully, then asked, "And what happened?" "Why stop?" Her throat tightened a little. "Life happened," she said softly. For a moment there was a flicker of guilt on his face, but he quickly covered it with a smirk. "Well, life certainly gave us a surprise tonight." The guests laughed again, trying to ease the tension. Lila smiled politely, even though inside she just wanted to step away. He turned to the audience and said loudly, "I told you, sometimes talent hides in the most unexpected places." There were cheers and claps again, but this time they felt more forced, like people wanted to show they were part of the moment. Then he looked back at her and said, "You should play something else." Her eyes widened slightly. "Sir, one song isn't enough. You've got everyone's attention now. Let's see if it wasn't just luck." She hesitated. She had played because she was pushed to, but doing it again felt different. The first time had been raw emotion. She had played what her heart wanted. Now it felt like a test. "Please, sir," she said softly. "I'd rather not." He chuckled, though there was an edge in his voice. "Don't be shy now. I'm offering you a chance to shine in front of people who could change your life." His words made her uneasy. She could sense that his interest wasn't kindness, and it was control. The room grew silent again, waiting to see what she would do. "I'm really not ready for another song," she said gently, hoping he would understand. But he didn't. He smirked and said, "What's wrong? Afraid the first one was just luck?" There was laughter again, light, nervous laughter, but to her it sounded like the same mocking sound from before. She looked down at her hands, feeling the sting of humiliation return. The respect she had earned moments ago was slipping away. "I didn't mean to offend anyone," she said quietly. "I just wanted to help." The billionaire folded his arms. "Help? You think playing like that is help? You think that's all your talent is worth? A quick show for my guests?" The tone in his voice made her heart twist. He wasn't angry. He was challenging her, like a man who couldn't accept that someone he had underestimated had just outshined him. The people in the room were watching carefully now, unsure whose side to take. Some of them looked uncomfortable, sensing that this was going too far. One older woman near the front whispered, "Let her be. She's already done enough." But Mr. Kane ignored her. "Play again," he said simply, his voice quiet but commanding. Lila's fingers clenched together. She could feel everyone's eyes on her. The pressure building again. She wanted to refuse. She wanted to walk away. But she also remembered what it felt like. That moment when the music had filled her soul, when for a few minutes she was free from everything that weighed her down. She took a shaky breath. "All right," she said softly. The billionaire smiled faintly and gestured toward the piano again. She walked back slowly, her reflection shining on the black surface of the instrument. Her hands hovered above the keys, but this time her mind wasn't clear. She wasn't playing for herself anymore, and she was playing because she was told to. The first few notes were soft and uncertain. Her heart wasn't in it, and it showed. The melody wavered, broken by hesitation. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. The magic from before wasn't there. It felt forced. Mr. Kane frowned. "You can do better than that," he said loudly. Lila looked up at him, her eyes full of quiet frustration. "I can't play when it feels like a performance." "What's wrong with performing?" he asked. "That's what great artists do." She shook her head. "Not like this. Music isn't about showing off. It's about feeling." The room went silent again. Some people nodded slightly, others just watched. The billionaire's face softened, but only for a second. Then he smiled again, trying to hide his discomfort. "Then feel it," he said simply. Lila stared at the piano for a long moment. She didn't want to give him what he wanted, but she couldn't walk away either. So she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. And then she began to play again, not the same melody as before, but something slower, sadder. The sound that filled the hall was gentle, like a whisper of something lost. Every note seemed to carry pain and peace at the same time. It wasn't a song to impress. It was a song to heal. The crowd leaned in, drawn to her once more. Even Mr. Kane stopped speaking. The melody changed halfway through, rising softly like a memory of hope breaking through sadness. Lila's fingers moved smoothly now, no longer trembling. Her face relaxed and her body swayed slightly with the rhythm. This time she wasn't playing for anyone in that room, not even for herself. She was playing for the memory of her mother, for all the time she had been told she wasn't enough, for every silent night she'd worked hard just to survive. When she finished, the room stayed silent again. But this silence was different. It wasn't shock or surprise. It was respect. The billionaire didn't say anything for a long time. He looked like a man who had just realized he'd gone too far. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower. "I underestimated you," he said quietly. "I shouldn't have." Lila nodded slightly. "It's all right, sir." But the truth was, it wasn't all right. She had given a piece of herself again, and she felt both proud and exhausted. The crowd erupted in applause, louder than before. Some people even stood, but Lila didn't stay to soak it in. She simply bowed her head and walked back toward the service area, disappearing through the doorway. Inside the kitchen, away from the noise, she leaned against the counter and closed her eyes. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear anymore. From release. She didn't know what would come next, but deep inside, something told her that her life had just started to change, and that the billionaire who had mocked her would never look at her the same way again. The night was slowly fading into quiet whispers and the sound of glasses clinking. The guests were still talking about the unexpected performance that had changed the mood of the entire evening. Some were still in awe, while others pretended not to care. But everyone knew they had seen something rare. Lila had returned to her duties, moving silently between tables, her heart still unsteady. She tried to act as if nothing had happened, but every time someone looked at her, she could feel their eyes carry a mix of surprise and admiration. She wasn't invisible anymore, and that was both strange and uncomfortable. Inside, she felt torn. What she had done came from a deep, private place she had never planned to share. Her music wasn't meant for people like them, people who treated her as a servant. Yet somehow her music had found them. She passed by the piano again, the same one that had brought her both fear and freedom that night. She glanced at it briefly as if it were a living thing. Its polished surface reflected the dim light and the faces of people who had once mocked her. It almost felt like it was watching her too, waiting for her to return. She took a deep breath and turned away, but before she could walk off, a voice stopped her. "Lila." It was Mr. Kane standing near the stage. He wasn't surrounded by his friends anymore. They had gone back to their drinks and small talk. Now it was just him, the man who had forced her into that performance, looking strangely lost in thought. She hesitated. "Yes, sir?" He gestured toward a chair nearby. "Sit for a moment." She wasn't sure what he wanted, but she obeyed. Her manager's voice in her head warned her not to upset him. Rich people didn't like to be ignored. When she sat, he leaned against the piano, his expression unreadable. "Do you realize what you did tonight?" he asked quietly. Lila lowered her gaze. "I just played." He smiled faintly. "No, you didn't just play. You made an entire room full of people stop talking. That doesn't happen often." She didn't respond. Compliments from him felt strange, like sunlight in a place that hadn't seen it before. He continued, "I've hosted dozens of these events. I've hired world-class pianists, singers, orchestras. None of them made people listen the way you did." Lila finally looked up, maybe because they were performing. "I wasn't." He tilted his head, intrigued. "Then what were you doing?" "Remembering," she said softly. There was silence between them for a while. Somewhere in the background, a waiter dropped a glass, but neither of them flinched. Mr. Kane tapped the edge of the piano absent-mindedly. "You said your mother taught you. Was she a pianist too?" Lila nodded. "She was a teacher. She played everywhere she could, small cafes, community halls. She said music was a language anyone could understand, no matter how rich or poor." He looked down for a moment. "She sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Lila said quietly. Her voice softened. "After she passed, I stopped. I thought, if I didn't play, I wouldn't miss her so much." Her words hung in the air like fragile glass. For a man who was always surrounded by power and noise, Mr. Kane found himself speechless. There was something about the honesty in her tone that made him uneasy, like a mirror reflecting something he didn't want to see. "Finally," he said, "you know I didn't mean to humiliate you earlier." Lila gave a faint smile. Yes, you did. But it doesn't matter now. Her calmness caught him off guard. He chuckled lightly, shaking his head. You're honest. I like that. I'm just tired of pretending, she said. I think everyone here is pretending, even you. His eyes lifted to hers, and for the first time that night, the confident look in them softened. Maybe you're right. Before he could say anything else, one of his assistants hurried over, reminding him that guests were waiting for a speech. He nodded and told her to wait. Then he turned back to Lila. I'll make you a deal, he said suddenly. Lila frowned slightly. A deal? Yes. I'll pay for you to take lessons again, to record your music properly. You don't belong carrying trays. You belong behind this piano. Her eyes widened. I can't accept that. Why not? He asked. It's just money to me. Exactly, she replied softly. That's the difference. To you, it's money. To me, it's meaning. I won't take help just because you feel guilty. Her words landed hard. Mr. Kane wasn't used to people speaking to him like that. But instead of being angry, he looked thoughtful, almost ashamed. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. You're right. Maybe I do feel guilty. I've spent years surrounded by people who only care about appearances. Tonight you reminded me that there's something real underneath all of it. Lila didn't know what to say. She wasn't trying to change him. She had only wanted to stand her ground. He stepped away from the piano, straightened his jacket, and said, Keep the offer in mind. You don't have to answer now. Then he left, walking back toward his guests. But his steps were slower this time, like a man who wasn't sure where he was going anymore. Lila sat there for a moment after he left, looking at the piano again. The night had turned strange, like a dream she couldn't wake from. She had come to serve food and drinks, not to open old wounds or change someone's heart. But maybe, in some strange way, fate had brought her there for that very reason. As the hours passed and guests began to leave, the grand hall slowly emptied. The laughter faded, replaced by the soft hum of workers cleaning up. Lila stayed behind to help, even though her shift had technically ended. She picked up napkins, polished glasses, and stacked plates. But her mind was far away, back on that stage, hearing her own music again. When she finally stepped outside, the cool night air brushed against her skin. The city lights glittered like tiny stars on the ground. She stood there for a moment, letting the quiet wrap around her. For the first time in a long while, she felt peace, fragile but real. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper, a note her mother had written years ago. It said, "Never stop playing. The world needs your music." She had carried it with her all these years, but never had the courage to read it until now. Lila smiled softly and tucked it back into her pocket. Maybe it was time to listen to those words again. The next morning, the city was buzzing with whispers. Someone had recorded her performance on their phone and posted it online. Within hours, it spread across social media. People were sharing the video, calling her the waitress who played like an angel. Lila had no idea. She was already back at the restaurant, setting tables for breakfast. She hummed quietly to herself, unaware that millions of people were watching her story unfold. It wasn't until the manager rushed in, holding his phone, that she realized something was happening. "You need to see this," he said breathlessly, showing her the screen. Her hands trembled as she saw herself sitting at that piano, eyes closed, playing from her soul. The comments were endless. People were writing things like, "She plays like she's lived 1,000 lives," and "Her music made me cry." She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It didn't feel real. Then later that afternoon, a black car pulled up outside the restaurant. Mr. Kane stepped out, wearing the same suit from last night but with a different expression. Less pride, more purpose. He walked inside, ignoring the curious looks from customers. "Lila," he said quietly. She looked up, startled. "Sir?" He handed her a small envelope. "That video of you now, it's everywhere. People want to know who you are. I'm arranging a concert for charity next week. You'll play there." She shook her head quickly. "No, I can't." "You can," he said firmly. "You already did the impossible once. Don't stop now." He placed the envelope on the counter and walked out before she could say anything else. Inside the envelope was a simple card. It had the name of the event, the date, and one line written in his handwriting. "Play like no one's watching, even if the whole world is." Lila stared at it for a long time. Her heart felt heavy and light all at once. She didn't know where this path would lead, but she knew one thing. She wasn't afraid anymore. That night, she returned to the hotel after her shift ended. The piano was still there, silent and waiting. She sat down, placed her hands gently on the keys, and began to play once more. This time, no one was watching. No billionaire. No audience. Just her, the music, and the quiet promise of a new beginning. The days that followed felt like a dream Lila couldn't quite believe. Everywhere she went, people seemed to recognize her. At first, she thought it was her imagination, the way strangers stared for a second longer, the way whispers followed her in the grocery store. But then she saw her own face on someone's phone screen. The video of her playing at the gala had gone everywhere. Millions of views, thousands of comments. People were calling her the waitress who moved the world. Some said her music had made them cry, others said it gave them hope. There were articles, blog posts, even small TV interviews replaying her performance. But while the world was busy talking about her, Lila stayed quiet. She still went to work every day, still served tables, still smiled politely when people recognized her. Fame didn't feel real to her. It wasn't what she wanted. What mattered to her was the music, and the feeling she got when her fingers touched the keys. A few days later, a letter arrived for her at the restaurant. It was written on thick paper with gold edges. Inside, it was an invitation. The grand charity performance, A Night of Hope, hosted by Mr. Kane. At the bottom, in neat handwriting, it said, "You will be our special guest pianist." She stared at the paper for a long time. Her hands shook slightly as she read it again. She had never played for a real audience before, not like this. The last time she'd performed had been at a small-town festival when she was a child, sitting beside her mother on a wooden bench. That memory felt like another lifetime. That night she couldn't sleep. The thought of stepping on a stage again made her heart race, but not from fear, from something deeper, something alive. By morning, she made her decision. She called the number on the invitation and said simply, "I'll do it." The following week, the preparations began. The event was set in a large concert hall, elegant but warm, filled with golden lights and velvet curtains. Unlike the gala, this night wasn't just about luxury. It was about charity, raising money for children who couldn't afford music lessons. When Lila arrived for rehearsal, she felt small standing in front of the massive piano at the center of the stage. It gleamed under the lights, its keys waiting. She ran her fingers across them gently, feeling the familiar weight of her past pressing against her chest. "Do you need anything?" A stage assistant asked kindly. She shook her head. "Just a little quiet." As she began to play softly, the empty hall filled with echoes of her melody. Even without an audience, her notes carried emotion. Each sound bounced back from the high ceilings, surrounding her like whispers of memories. She stopped after a few minutes, closing her eyes. For a moment, she saw her mother again, smiling, nodding in approval. "You're still listening, aren't you?" Lila whispered under her breath. When she looked up, she noticed Mr. Kane standing near the door watching her. He wasn't wearing his usual confident expression. He looked different, humbled, even uncertain. "You sound like you've been playing all your life," he said quietly. "I stopped for too long," she replied. "But I guess music never really leaves you." He smiled faintly. "You were right that night. I was pretending." "About a lot of things." Lila turned toward him curious. He walked closer. "You said music is about feeling, not showing off. I used to think success was about being seen. But I listened to your song again last night, and for the first time in years, I actually felt something real." She didn't know what to say. All she could manage was, "Then maybe it was worth all of it." He nodded slowly. "It was, and this concert, it's not about me anymore. It's about giving others what you reminded me of, the beauty that can come from pain." Lila smiled softly. "Then let's make it count." The night of the concert arrived faster than she expected. The hall was packed. Hundreds of people dressed in elegant clothes, lights flashing from cameras, the hum of excitement filling the air. But unlike the gala, this crowd wasn't there to mock or gossip. They were there to listen. Backstage, Lila's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the small ribbon around her wrist, one that had belonged to her mother. It was her quiet good luck charm. "You ready?" someone asked behind her. It was Mr. Kane again, his tone respectful, almost gentle. She smiled nervously, as I'll ever be. When she stepped onto the stage, the applause began, polite at first, then louder as people recognized her. The light hit her face, warm and blinding, but she didn't flinch. She walked to the piano, took a deep breath, and sat down. The hall fell completely silent. For a few seconds, she didn't move. She just sat there, feeling the weight of the moment. Her heart beat fast, but not from fear. It was something purer, stronger. She thought of her mother again, of every late night they'd shared, of every note she'd learned by heart. Then, slowly, she placed her fingers on the keys. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant. The melody began like a whisper, delicate, fragile, full of emotion. Each sound carried warmth and sadness, like memories turning into light. The crowd leaned forward in their seats, drawn in by the tenderness in her touch. As she continued, the music began to change. It rose gently, like hope breaking through clouds. The tempo quickened, her fingers moving gracefully, her body swaying slightly with every chord. The notes weren't just sounds anymore, and they were feelings, flowing freely from her heart to everyone listening. People in the audience stopped breathing for a moment. Some closed their eyes. Some held hands. Others simply stared, afraid to blink and miss a single second. And then it happened. That moment when sound became silence, when the entire room seemed to melt into one shared heartbeat. Lila's music filled the air like light through stained glass, soft but powerful. Every note told a story of love, loss, courage, and rebirth. It wasn't just a song. It was everything she'd ever held back, everything she'd never said out loud. When she reached the final section, the melody slowed again. It turned gentle, full of peace, like a sunset fading over the ocean. Her hands hovered over the last note for a moment, then pressed it softly. The sound lingered in the air, then faded into silence. For a few seconds, no one moved. The hall was frozen in that quiet, sacred moment. Then, like a wave breaking, applause erupted. Thunderous, emotional, unending. People rose to their feet. Some were crying openly. Others simply stood still, clapping with awe written all over their faces. Lila bowed her head, overwhelmed. She hadn't expected this, not the noise, not the emotion. It was too big, too real. When she looked up, she saw Mr. Kane standing in the front row, clapping harder than anyone else. There were tears in his eyes, something she never thought she'd see. After the performance, backstage was full of people wanting to meet her. Journalists, musicians, guests. They all wanted to shake her hand, to ask her how she had done it. But Lila just smiled politely and said the same thing to everyone. I just played what I felt. Later, when the hall had emptied and the lights dimmed, she walked back to the stage one last time. The piano stood alone in the center, still glowing faintly from the spotlight. She ran her hand along the keys, whispering softly, "Thank you." Mr. Kane joined her quietly, his footsteps echoing on the floor. "You silenced them again," he said with a smile. Lila laughed lightly. "I didn't mean to." "That's what makes it beautiful," he replied. "You didn't play to impress them. You played to remind them." She looked at him. "Remind them of what?" "That music, real music, doesn't come from fame or money. It comes from the heart," she smiled. Then maybe the world needed to remember that. They stood there in silence for a while, the quiet hum of the hall wrapping around them. Then Lila turned back to the piano one more time. "I used to think I'd never play again," she said softly. "But tonight I think I found myself again." Mr. Kane nodded. "You didn't just find yourself, Lila. You found all of us, too." She looked out at the empty seats, the echo of her song still alive in the air. For the first time in years, she felt completely free. The same girl who once hid behind trays and silence had now filled an entire room with the sound of her soul. And the world had listened. After that night, everything started changing for Lila in ways she had never imagined. Her performance at the charity event became the talk of the city. People didn't just applaud her for her talent. They admired her humility, her story, her heart. It wasn't the kind of fame built on glamour or luck. It was the kind that came from something genuine and raw. But for Lila, life didn't instantly become easy. She still worked mornings at the cafe. She still helped her neighbor with errands. Fame didn't erase her struggles, it just added new ones. Now strangers wanted to know everything about her life. Reporters showed up outside the restaurant, hoping to capture a picture or a quote. Some guests even came just to see the piano waitress in person. At first, she found it strange. She wasn't used to attention. She had lived most of her life unseen, and now everyone wanted to see her. The world had changed around her, but she was still the same. A girl who found peace in music. One evening, after the restaurant closed, she sat alone at one of the tables with a cup of tea. She looked out the window, lost in thought. That's when the door opened quietly and Mr. Kane stepped inside. She looked up, surprised. "You again?" He smiled slightly. "You make it sound like I'm haunting this place." "You kind of are," she said with a small laugh. "You're not exactly the usual crowd." He pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "I wanted to talk to you, privately." Her expression softened. "About what?" He paused, his gaze dropping to the table. "About your music." "And your future?" She leaned back, unsure what he meant. "My future?" He nodded. "I spoke with a few people after the concert. Producers, foundation directors, sponsors. They were all moved by your performance. Many of them want to support you. You could record your own album, travel, perform around the world. This is your chance, Lila." Her heart skipped a beat. The thought of it felt both exciting and terrifying. "Perform around the world?" She repeated softly. "Yes, you could inspire millions, not just hundreds. You could live from your art instead of serving coffee to people who don't even look at you." Lila didn't answer right away. She stared down at her hands, the same hands that had washed dishes, cleaned tables, and somehow made people cry with a piano. She wanted to say yes, but there was something heavy inside her, something unspoken. After a long silence, she said quietly, "I don't know if I'm ready for that." Mr. Kane looked at her seriously. "Lila, you were born ready. You've just been hiding it." She smiled faintly but shook her head. "It's not about being ready. It's about remembering why I play. If it becomes about fame, if it becomes about money, I might lose what made it special." He studied her for a moment. "You really are different." "I don't want to be different," she said softly. "I just want to stay honest." He nodded slowly. "Then maybe that's why people need you. Because the world is full of noise and you make people listen to silence." The words stayed with her long after he left that night. She didn't sleep much. She kept replaying the performance in her mind. The crowd, the music, the emotions. And buried beneath all that was something she hadn't faced yet. The pain she had carried since her mother's death. The next morning, she took a bus to the old neighborhood she hadn't visited in years. The streets were quieter now. The small music shop where her mother used to work had closed down. She stopped outside the building, pressing her hand against the dusty glass. Inside, the piano still sat there, covered in a sheet, untouched. The owner, an old man she recognized, came out from the back when he saw her. "Lila?" he said, his voice filled with surprise. "I saw you on TV. You made us all proud." She smiled sadly. "I just wanted to see it again." "The piano," he nodded and unlocked the door. "Go ahead. It's still yours if you want it." She walked inside slowly. The smell of old wood and sheet music hit her instantly, and for a moment she was a child again, sitting beside her mother, laughing as they played duets. She lifted the sheet gently. The keys were yellowed, but they still felt the same under her fingers. She pressed one key. It was out of tune, but the sound was enough to bring tears to her eyes. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "If you ever get lost, play. The music will find you again." That afternoon, she sat there for hours, playing softly, lost in the kind of peace she hadn't felt in years. It was as if her mother was right there beside her again, nodding along to the melody. When she finally stopped, the old man stood quietly near the door. "You know," he said, "your mother once told me you'd make the world listen one day." I guess she was right. Lila smiled, wiping her eyes. "She believed in me when no one else did." "Then keep making her proud," he said gently. That night, as she took the bus home, Lila made her decision. She would accept the opportunity Mr. Kane had offered, but on her own terms. She would play not for fame, but for meaning. The next day, she went to meet Mr. Kane at his office. It was a tall glass building overlooking the city, modern, cold, and intimidating. He greeted her warmly and offered her tea, but she shook her head. "I've thought about what you said," she began, "and I'll do it. I'll perform again, but I want to make sure the concerts help people. Music helped me survive. I wanted to do the same for others. Mr. Kane's eyes softened. You have my word. He pulled out a folder and handed it to her. We'll set up a foundation. Free music programs for children who can't afford lessons. Every ticket from your concerts will help fund it. Lila's lips trembled. You'd really do that? He nodded. It's the least I can do. You reminded me what purpose feels like. She smiled. A genuine, grateful smile that reached her eyes. Then we'll make something beautiful together. The months that followed were a whirlwind. Lila began performing again. Small concerts at first, then larger ones. Each performance told a story, not just of her talent, but of her heart. She spoke before every show, sharing little bits of her journey. The cafe, her mother, the pain that shaped her music. People loved her not just for her skill, but for her honesty. Every city she visited, she met children who dreamed of playing like her. She made sure each of them got the chance. Her foundation grew faster than she imagined. Music schools, workshops, scholarships. And Mr. Kane changed too. He no longer appeared in the spotlight the way he once did. Instead, he quietly worked behind the scenes, supporting Lila's vision. He seemed happier, freer. Sometimes, when she played, she'd spot him in the crowd. No longer the proud billionaire, but a man rediscovering what mattered. One evening after a performance in Paris, she found him standing near the piano looking thoughtful. You know, he said, when I first forced you to play that night, I thought I was testing you. But it turns out you were testing me. Lila laughed softly. I think we both learned something. He smiled. You taught me that power doesn't come from money or control. It comes from being moved by something real, she nodded. And you taught me that people can change. For a moment, they stood in silence, listening to the faint sound of the city outside. Then she said, I've been thinking. Maybe next year we could hold a concert in my hometown, for the kids there. He smiled. Consider it done. As she looked around the empty concert hall that night, she realized how far she'd come. From a quiet waitress who once served tables in the shadows, to a woman who filled rooms with light and sound. But more than that, she realized her music had healed not just her own heart, but others too. And yet deep inside, she knew her story wasn't over. There was still one more song she needed to play, one final tribute that would tie everything together. That thought stayed with her as she closed the piano lid gently, whispering to herself, for you, Mom, always for you. Months had passed since Lila's music began to travel the world. Her performances had become more than just concerts. They were moments of healing, for her and for everyone who listened. Yet despite all the success, she remained grounded, still that same quiet woman who once wiped tables and dreamed of a piano she could barely touch. Her life was busier now. Interviews, travel, recordings, but every time she walked on stage, she carried her mother's ribbon on her wrist. It reminded her of where it all began. Every note she played was still for her. One evening after a concert in Italy, she sat by her hotel window, watching the city lights fade into the horizon. She was exhausted, but her mind wouldn't rest. Something inside her kept whispering that her journey wasn't complete, that there was still one thing left undone. A few days later, as she packed her things for the next show, she found an old envelope tucked inside her suitcase. It was the same one she'd found years ago, her mother's letter. She had read it so many times that the edges were frayed, but that night it felt different. She opened it carefully and read the words again. When life feels too loud, play until it's quiet again. That's where you'll find peace, not in the world, but in the sound between the notes. Her eyes filled with tears. That was it. That was what she'd been searching for. Peace. The next morning, she called Mr. Kane. He sounded surprised to hear her voice so early. Is everything all right? He asked. Yes, she said softly. I've been thinking. I want to go home. I want to play one last concert in the town where it all began. There was a pause. Then he said quietly, I think that's exactly what you should do. The plan came together quickly. The foundation would sponsor the event. The entire concert would be free, open to everyone. It would take place in the same town square where Lila's mother had once played for small crowds. When the announcement went public, people were moved by the idea. News outlets called it a homecoming of hope. Fans from all over wanted to attend, but Lila insisted that there would be no VIP sections, no luxury boxes, Just people gathered for the love of music. Weeks later, Lila stood in that familiar square again. It looked smaller than she remembered, but somehow more beautiful. The evening sun was setting behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The piano stood in the center, simple but elegant. It wasn't grand or new. It was the old piano from the shop, the same one she'd played as a child. Mr. Kane had arranged for it to be restored and delivered here as a surprise. When Lila saw it, she froze, her eyes filling with emotion. She ran her hand along the wood, whispering, "You brought it back." Mr. Kane smiled gently. "It's where it belongs." As the crowd began to gather, Lila felt a strange calm wash over her. There were people of all ages, children sitting on the ground, elderly couples holding hands, shopkeepers, teachers, families. Some had traveled hours to be there, but among all the faces she felt another presence, one she couldn't see but could feel. Her mother. When it was time, Lila walked to the piano. The crowd quieted instantly. The soft hum of the evening breeze filled the air. She sat down and took a deep breath. For a long moment she didn't play. She just closed her eyes and listened to the sound of the people breathing, the birds in the trees, the faint laughter of a child. And then she began. The first notes were slow, gentle, like a lullaby. It wasn't a famous piece, not something anyone had heard before. It was her own, a song she had written in her heart over the years, a mix of memory and feeling. Each chord seemed to speak words she could never say aloud, words about love, loss, forgiveness, and hope. The melody grew stronger, rising and falling like waves. It carried the sound of her childhood laughter, the warmth of her mother's arms, the ache of loneliness, and the quiet strength she'd built along the way. People in the crowd began to close their eyes, swaying slightly. Some wiped away tears. Children leaned on their parents' shoulders, listening in silence. Lila played with her whole soul, her fingers moving as if guided by something beyond her. The world around her disappeared. There was no fame, no fear, no spotlight, only music. As she reached the final section, her hands slowed. The melody turned soft again, fading into something almost like a whisper. She could feel her mother beside her now, not as a ghost but as love, alive in every note. The last sound echoed gently into the air and faded away. For a few seconds the crowd didn't move. Then the applause began. Soft at first, then growing louder until the whole square erupted with claps, cheers, and tears. Lila stood slowly and bowed, her heart full. She smiled, not because of the praise, but because she knew her mother would have been proud. Mr. Kane stepped up onto the small stage, clapping along with everyone else. When he reached her, he leaned in and said quietly, "You did it." She looked at him and smiled. "No," she said softly. "We did." After the concert, people stayed for hours, talking, laughing, hugging. Children crowded around the piano, eager to touch the keys. Lila sat with them, showing a little girl how to play a simple tune. "That's it," she said gently as the girl pressed the right notes. "Music isn't about being perfect. It's about feeling something." The girl smiled shyly. "Like you?" Lila laughed softly. "Exactly." Later that night, when the square had emptied and the lights had dimmed, Lila stayed behind. The piano was still there, glimmering faintly under the moonlight. She sat down one more time and played quietly to herself. Not for anyone else, just for peace. Mr. Kane approached and stood beside her silently. When she finished, he said, "You've given something to this world that money could never buy." She smiled. "You helped make it possible." He shook his head. "You just reminded me what matters. I used to think I had everything. But you taught me that sometimes the richest person is the one who feels the most." She looked up at him, her eyes gentle. "And sometimes the poorest person is the one who's forgotten how to feel." He nodded. "Maybe we both found something tonight." The next morning, the newspapers called the concert a moment the world would never forget. Videos of her performance spread everywhere. But Lila didn't care about headlines anymore. She cared about the music, the people, the children who now had a chance to learn. Weeks later, the new music school opened in her hometown. The sign above the door read, "The Harmony House, inspired by love." Inside, children's laughter mixed with the sound of piano keys and violin strings. Lila visited often, teaching them whenever she could. She never charged a fee. Music gave me everything, she said. It's my turn to give it back. Years passed, but the memory of that night never faded. People still talked about the waitress who played one song and silenced a room full of the rich. They told her story as a reminder that talent can live anywhere, even in the quiet corners of the world, waiting for one moment to be heard. And as for Lila, she never chased fame again. She didn't need to. She found something greater, purpose. Every time she sat at a piano, she felt her mother's hand on her shoulder as if whispering, "See? You did it." In one of her last performances, now older but still radiant, she told the audience softly, "When I was a waitress, I thought my life was small. I thought no one would ever hear my song. But music has a way of finding its way home. So if you have something inside you, you ought to dream, a voice, a melody, and don't hide it. The world might be waiting to hear it." The audience rose to their feet, applauding through tears, and that night, as she pressed her hands to the piano for one last song, she smiled, not as the girl who was once forced to play, but as the woman who chose to. The first note rang out like a promise, and the music filled the air once more, gentle, pure, and eternal, because true music, she knew now, never really ends. It just keeps living in the hearts it touches.